On the morning of February 13, 2026, one of the most powerful warships ever built received orders that would alter the strategic balance of the Middle East. The USS Gerald R. Ford, a 100,000-ton floating airbase, changed course from the Caribbean and began moving toward Iranian waters. This was not a routine rotation or a training deployment. It was a deliberate signal, one conveyed through steel, nuclear propulsion, and overwhelming firepower. And Tehran understood exactly what that signal meant. Because just 8 months earlier, American forces had demonstrated something that permanently shifted the strategic equation. They proved that even Iran's most protected facilities, buried beneath mountains, reinforced concrete, and layers of rock, were not beyond reach. Now, as 2 U.S. carrier strike groups move toward the Persian Gulf for the first time in years, the core question is no longer whether the United States can strike Iran again. The real question is whether Iran will push events to the point where Washington feels it must. The deployment order followed a stark comment from Donald Trump just hours earlier. Asked why another aircraft carrier was being sent to the region, he responded bluntly, "In case we don't make a deal, we'll need it." Those words carried enormous weight. They evoked memories of massive bunker buster bombs, a 12-day conflict, and the possibility of an even larger confrontation ahead. To understand why this moment is so dangerous, it's necessary to revisit what happened on June 22, 2025, the day the United States revealed a capability Iran cannot reliably defend against. At approximately 2:10 a.m. Tehran time, the first massive ordnance penetrator tore through the night sky above the Fordo Enrichment Complex. Officially designated the GBU-57, this weapon is unlike conventional munitions. It is nearly 20 feet long, weighs 30,000 pounds, and exists for a single purpose: destroying targets designed to survive anything else. Fordo lies roughly 95 miles southwest of Tehran, carved into a mountainside and buried an estimated 80 meters underground. Iranian engineers believed it was invulnerable. They had studied past wars, analyzed failed bunker-busting attempts, and reinforced the facility with multiple layers of high-strength concrete and rock. That confidence proved misplaced. 7 B-2 Spirit stealth bombers, the only aircraft capable of carrying these weapons, departed from Whiteman Air Force Base and flew halfway around the world. Iranian air defenses, already weakened by earlier Israeli strikes, never detected them. 12 MOPs struck Fordo. 2 more hit Natanz. Each bomb followed a unique flight path, penetration angle, and detonation depth, carefully calculated months, Shenji years, in advance. These weapons did not explode on impact. Traveling at extreme velocity, their hardened steel casings allowed them to punch through layers of rock and reinforced concrete. Internal sensors tracked the materials encountered during penetration. At precisely programmed depths, each warhead detonated. The explosion was immense, but the real damage came from what happened next. Detonating deep underground, the blasts generated enormous overpressure confined within tunnels and chambers. Shockwaves surged through ventilation shafts and corridors, turning the facility's own infrastructure into channels of destruction. Reinforced walls fractured. Heavy blast doors failed. Sensitive nuclear equipment was destroyed almost instantly. According to Dan Kane, chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, the effectiveness of the strike lay not just in explosive force, but in precision and confinement. The attack lasted minutes, but its consequences reshaped Iran's nuclear program. Satellite imagery later showed surface damage, but experts emphasized that the most severe destruction occurred out of sight. Underground tunnels collapsed. Power systems failed. Centrifuge halls, the core of enrichment operations, were buried and rendered unusable. Rebuilding such a facility would require extensive excavation, new construction, and years of effort under constant surveillance and sanctions. Strategically, the strike demonstrated a new reality. Modern bunker-penetrating weapons are designed not simply to destroy structures, but to dismantle entire operational ecosystems. However, the situation today is even more dangerous than it was last summer. 2 of the 14 bombs did not detonate. In early February 2026, Iran's Foreign Minister Abbas Araghchi acknowledged that unexploded GBU-57s remain buried inside damaged nuclear sites. Each represents a massive unexploded ordnance hazard, complicating inspections, repairs, and cleanup. Iran has cited this risk to restrict access by the International Atomic Energy Agency, arguing that no clear international rules exist for inspecting nuclear facilities struck by weapons of this magnitude. But those unexploded bombs present another concern. If Iranian engineers can safely recover and analyze them, they gain insight into some of America's most advanced weapons technology. Materials, sensors, guidance systems, and penetration methods developed over decades. The irony is stark. Weapons intended to destroy Iran's nuclear infrastructure could provide knowledge that helps Iran harden future facilities. And this brings the story back to the USS Gerald R. Ford, now moving toward the Arabian Sea to join the USS Abraham Lincoln Strike Group. The Ford is not just another carrier. It represents a generational leap in naval aviation. Fully loaded, it displaces around 100,000 tons and stretches more than 330 meters from bow to stern. Its flight deck supports dozens of aircraft, including Super Hornets, electronic warfare platforms, airborne early warning aircraft, and helicopters. What truly sets it apart, however, is its operational tempo. Older Nimitz-class carriers can sustain roughly 120 sorties per day. The Ford, using the electromagnetic aircraft launch system, can routinely generate around 160. In surge conditions, that number can exceed 260 sorties in 24 hours. This means a single ship can deliver more combat power in a day than two older carriers operating at normal pace. EMALS replaces steam catapults with electromagnetic motors, reducing stress on aircraft and allowing precise control over launch force. Heavy strike jets and lightweight unmanned aircraft can be launched safely from the same deck. This capability is critical as the Navy integrates systems like the MQ-25 Stingray, which extend the range of carrier-based aircraft through aerial refueling. Taken together, the deployment of the Ford is not symbolic. It is a concrete escalation, one that signals readiness, capability, and resolve. And for Tehran, it raises a sobering reality. The margin for miscalculation is shrinking fast. Iran studied Millennium Challenge carefully. Every move, every khatim, every tactic, every lesson learned by Van Riper's Red Team was analyzed, dissected, and absorbed. They didn't just file it away, they built an entire naval doctrine around it. The IRGC Navy drills constantly on swarm attacks. Communications are designed to function without radio. Weapons are positioned on islands throughout the Persian Gulf and along the Iranian coastline. Fast attack boats are stored in underground facilities, shielded from preemptive strikes. Iran has created a force built for one purpose: to trade dozens of small, expendable platforms for a few high-value American warships. And then there are the drone carriers. Converted civilian ships now serve as mobile arsenals of aerial drones, surface drones, and potentially underwater drones. The Shahid Bagheri, a former container ship, can launch Shahed loitering munitions, unmanned surface vehicles, and theoretically unmanned submarines. It doesn't need heavy armor, radar, or a massive engine. Its power lies in numbers, mobility, and overwhelming the enemy with drones. Intelligence vessels, like the Saviz and Beshad, feed real-time targeting data, creating multi-dimensional attack networks that can strike from above, on the surface, and potentially from beneath the waves simultaneously. These aren't theoretical threats. They are operational, tested, and confirmed by satellite imagery. And now, timing has made all of this more dangerous than ever. The U.S. carrier deployment is not random. It coincides with the worst domestic massacre in modern Iranian history. On December 28, 2025, protests erupted in Tehran's Grand Bazaar, initially sparked by sky-high inflation, soaring food prices, and the collapse of the rial. Within days, protests spread to all 31 provinces. What began as economic anger quickly became a political uprising. Protesters called for regime change, tore down portraits of Supreme Leader Ali Khamenei and revolutionary founder Ruhollah Khomeini, and reclaimed national identity separate from the theocracy. On January 3, 2026, Khamenei responded with a chilling broadcast. Protesters were rioters and terrorists linked to foreign powers and must be put in their place. Security forces interpreted this as permission to kill without hesitation. Between January 8th and 12th, under a near total internet blackout, Iranian security forces unleashed a wave of violence so brutal it defies belief. Thousands of protesters were killed in cities across Iran. Hospitals overflowed with victims, many shot in the head or eyes. Footage smuggled out shows bodies piled in morgues, corpses in black bags, families desperately searching for their loved ones. Eyewitnesses reported security forces executing the wounded, taking selfies with the dead and speaking in Arabic, suggesting foreign reinforcement. Casualty estimates vary, but even conservative numbers are staggering. The Iranian government claims 3,117 deaths. Independent organizations like Iran Human Rights documented at least 3,128. Reports from journalists and international outlets push estimates into the tens of thousands. Thousands remain detained, facing torture and the threat of mass execution. And now, weeks after this massacre, the USS Gerald R. Ford sails into the Gulf. Its deployment is a message in plain sight. The United States might support regime change, provide air cover for future uprisings, and could turn domestic unrest into externally backed revolution. Trump made it explicit. The removal of the Islamic Republic would be the best outcome. This is no longer about nuclear programs, missile arsenals, or proxy conflicts. It's about overthrowing a regime. But this signal carries danger. It hardens Iranian leaders' resolve, removes incentives to compromise, and makes war more likely. They understand that a conflict with the United States could become existential. Survival of the Islamic Republic is at stake, and they have every reason to use all weapons, all tactics, and every advantage, because they have nothing to lose. If you want, I can merge this with the first section about the USS Gerald R. Ford, its strike capabilities. and Iran's asymmetric warfare into one full cinematic YouTube script. It would read like a complete 10-15-minute documentary segment, with tension, pacing, and drama perfect for narration. Do you want me to do that next? Which brings us to the negotiations, the so-called diplomacy, happening even as two U.S. carrier strike groups steam toward Iranian waters. Even as American and Iranian forces position for potential conflict. Even as the clock ticks down on Trump's one-month ultimatum. On February 6, 2026, in Muscat, Oman, American Special Envoy Steve Witkoff, a real estate developer, longtime Trump associate, and political outsider, met with Iranian Foreign Minister Abbas Araghchi, Iran's career nuclear negotiator. They never sat in the same room. Messages passed back and forth by Omani intermediaries, the same diplomats who had quietly brokered the original nuclear deal years ago. Both sides called the talks constructive, which in diplomatic code means they didn't collapse immediately, but the chasm between positions is enormous. Iran's position is clear. The nuclear program is open to scrutiny, but the missiles and regional proxies are off limits. These are non-negotiable red lines. From Tehran's perspective, surrender them, and the Islamic Republic becomes vulnerable to the very regime change America and Israel have openly desired since June's 12-day war. Missiles provide deterrence. Proxies extend Iran's strategic reach across the Middle East. Without them, Iran loses its ability to fight back, to pressure Israel, to safeguard its own territory. The U.S. and Israel have an entirely different calculus. On February 11th, met Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu for 3 hours. Netanyahu demanded any deal address not only the nuclear program, but Iran's missile capabilities and support for groups like Hezbollah, Hamas, and the Houthis. Israel sees these as existential threats. Hezbollah's estimated 150,000 rockets, Hamas's arsenal, tunnels, cross-border raids. Every Iranian-backed attack is a dagger pointed at Israeli civilians. For Israel, a deal that leaves these capabilities untouched is no deal at all. Trump's one-month timeline for a resolution is telling. This is not the years-long negotiation needed to build trust and verify compliance. This is an ultimatum in disguise, designed to force Iran's hand. And the carriers? They aren't just weapons. They are leverage, a floating declaration of American power ready to turn diplomacy into airstrikes. The USS Gerald R. Ford alone can launch 160 sorties per day under normal operations. 2 planes per strike package, multiple targets per sortie. Over a week, that's more than 500 missions. Over 2 weeks, over 1,000. Add the Abraham Lincoln Strike Group, and the U.S. has enough firepower to strike hundreds of targets simultaneously, maintain constant air patrols, electronic warfare missions, surveillance, and reserve capacity to respond to unexpected threats. Overwhelming force poised for decisive action. But here's the question. Analysts are quietly asking, what would another strike achieve that Operation Midnight Hammer didn't? The June 2025 strikes already crippled Iran's nuclear infrastructure, destroyed thousands of centrifuges, killed key scientists, and eliminated senior military planners. Even by the most pessimistic estimates, Iran is still years away from producing a nuclear weapon. So why the carriers now? The emerging answer is stark: regime change. The deployment isn't primarily about nukes or missiles. It's about taking advantage of Iran's weakest moment since 1979. It's about supporting a potential uprising, finishing what protesters started, eliminating the regime itself rather than just its nuclear ambitions. This is far more ambitious and far more dangerous than any previous objective. These carriers serve multiple purposes simultaneously: pressuring Iran in talks, preparing for strikes if diplomacy fails, deterring attacks on U.S. forces and allies, and positioning for possible regime change operations should protests flare anew. But they also increase the risk of miscalculation. Iran must prepare for the worst-case scenario, which could trigger preemptive strikes or escalation on either side. The next few weeks are critical. Will diplomacy prevail, or will confrontation erupt? Will Iran bend or resist? Will Trump compromise or push for war to enforce regime change? Can the Islamic Republic survive internal unrest and external pressure? Will regional allies support or restrain American action? Will the carriers strike or remain symbols of power? The world now waits. The largest, most advanced carriers, capable of delivering bunker-busting bombs and overwhelming air power, are within striking range of a country that has spent decades preparing for exactly this kind of asymmetric war. Diplomats are talking. Military assets are in position. Protesters mourn and prepare. And the one-month clock ticks down, a deadline that could bring either a fragile peace or a war that makes Operation Midnight Hammer look like a prologue. The move has been made. The stage is set. The question remains, will the Middle East witness a transformation written in fire, blood, and airstrikes, or find a path back from the brink against all odds?